Hi, I'm Al, and this is the Taxi Studio Be More, Fear Less podcast series. And our current series is about the 5 stages of fear. And those stages are imagination, fear, paralysis, acceleration, and memories. And it gives me great pleasure today to invite a friend I met a few years ago over in Penny Fan, a chap called Steve Crompton. Hi, Steve, how you doing?
Hi Al, yeah, I'm good, thanks, mate. Good to see you. Thanks for
Good,
having me
good.
on.
Oh, that's all right. It's an absolute pleasure. I'm super excited about today's talk. We've got a lot of ground to cover, and it is going to be it's going to be really interesting, I think, for the listeners. So I just want to kind of kick off a little bit and just give the listeners a little bit of a very this is a very quick plot history of of you from like small to big. So let's have a run through of how I think that's worked out for you. So I think it's fair to say, like from the chats before, you had a bit of a tough upbringing in a household that was often violent, and you kind of got mixed up in drugs at an early age as well. But like after that, you kind of found your feet in the air court for a while, and you had let's say a colourful career there. It was productive but also colourful, and again you got distracted by a few different habits, and you kind of like landed yourself in a bit of trouble and hot water for a while. And then after a few years of being out in the wilderness as such, you kind of managed to get yourself onto the SAS Who Dares Wins TV series, uh, and which helped define some of the purpose that you've got now going forward. And I think it's fair to say now that actually you dedicate your life to others, which is incredible, and we'll talk about that later on. And you've gone on to like set up an incredible registered charity called Challenge Child Poverty. And I'm going to talk in a bit of detail later on about some of I got to be honest about them, they are incredible things, feats of endurance that you've done. But I don't want to give too much away now, but let's just say that you must have legs of steel, mate. I'm also going to now just remind the listeners a little bit about what paralysis exactly is in the stage of fear, which will kind of focus most of the conversation around today. So paralysis for many is about facing your fear can bring on physical and mental paralysis. And even if it's fleeting, it can be completely immobilizing. The brain often like shuts down and the body can't shift. And the fear becomes so consuming, you just can't think your way out of it. And sometimes you just have to wait for that moment to pass, and then like your brain gets the opportunity to determine how we need to respond. And that's always like the two elements are like fight or flight, before you get into the next stage of acceleration. But today we're going to chat about paralysis because I think there's lots of very interesting relative component parts of like your life and your upbringing and the experiences that you have, where I think this has been like something which has held you back, or you've broken through that. I'm going to start off in a bit of a chronological order, if that's okay with you. So, I kind of put in the opening, you had a bit. I mean, let's be honest, you had a bit of a tough childhood. You were down in Hollerton, and you lived in a home which had like domestic violence. And I remember when we had a bit of a pre-chat before. You said you had a dad that said he loved you a lot, but often he acted differently, and those actions, like they bring fear with them, or paralysis. And I think if you grow up in an environment like that, it it must be really confusing as a child. I think particularly like as an adult, we can understand and spot behaviors, can't we? So we understand when someone's not being very nice to us. But as a child, I think that's quite confusing, particularly when you're in a family environment. So, like, I got a little bit of a question about you. Like, what sort of age do you think you realised that, like, you were in a bit of an environment that wasn't always positive?
I thinking back my earliest I mean, I've got early memories of domestic violence between my mum and dad and stuff like that. But my real memories are from when probably around eight, nine onwards. From 8 to 16 before I joined the army was just nothing but a a reoccurring trauma, really, of just my mum suffered with alcoholism, when my mum and dad both used to drink a lot, and they used to fight really viciously, hurt each other and screaming and shouting. And I remember, I don't remember a hell of a lot, but I remember back to a certain few times towards the end of their marriage that, I remember just being so petrified, like in my room, not knowing, because it's confusing, like you said, you don't know, and it has a really damaging, long-lasting effect.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, not a happy place. I think that's fair to say. And I think you said some interesting things there actually. Like you said, you were often like petrified in your room, and I think that there is a classic example of like paralysis, actually, isn't it? Like when you're petrified, you're paralyzed, aren't you? Like, and you were probably like putting yourself actually through paralysis, putting yourself in a safe place, in that during
yeah,
that time. And I think that's what's quite interesting about like how we're going to explore the word paralysis in your journey.
yeah. It's your your mind, your body's way of protecting you, isn't it? You sort of try to dissociate yourself from the situation and sort of
I think that's an absolute winner there. It's I hadn't really
yeah,
thought of it like that until we discussed it then, actually, like because the terminology that we've been talking about to explain it is always about like the immobilization and the hindrance, but actually there's a really really important safety mechanism to it.
yeah, yeah,
So that's super interesting. But likewise, like some of that reflection from those early years is potentially like paralyzed you as you got older in different
yeah.
scenarios. Yeah, because of like the memories that you've got from that. And like memories again are another aspect of like one of the tranches of fear. So I think that's quite interesting. And I know after like those younger years, like when you started getting into your teens, you started experimenting with drugs, and you had there's plenty of stuff out there from cannabis and pills to uppers and downers and amphets, and there's, if you want to find stuff, there's plenty to do that. And do you think that potentially you were doing that as a form of escapism?
I started so young. It was like 10, 11 years of age. It was quite young, and I don't know whether, I can't say like I smoked cannabis for the first time to escape, but I certainly, once I had tried it, it wasn't like I was trying to find something to escape. I can't remember thinking, oh, I need to find something to escape, but I tried it for the first time and it did help me escape. It helped me. So in the beginning, it was almost like it was so addictive for me because this was something that was helping me escape this, you know, traumatic time.
It's complicated, isn't it? I mean, that's like part of
Yeah,
the cycle of addiction and stuff, like which
yeah,
comes later on. But actually, in those early years for you, like and the last thing I want to say, that it was better for you than what you were experiencing before, but like from a mental point of view, like it was making you feel like you were in a better place, even though actually technically it wasn't.
yeah. No, for sure. It was definitely, looking back now, it definitely wasn't a better place, and what was to come after that. It's definitely not um, the road I would have wanted to take. But at the time, yeah, I guess like you said, it was escaping.
It's yeah, like the things that we do during our lives, at these given points, I think we need to forgive ourselves for, because they were the right thing for us in those moments. And on reflection, we can like look at that and take it apart and say, well, that was a bad thing I did, but actually at that time it was potentially the right thing for you
Yeah,
then, because it put you in a better place. Ironically, like what that then did was, like, to come back to like what we're talking about today, is paralyze you in a different way, didn't it? Because it
yeah,
actually it
yeah,
held it
yeah,
held you in that grip
yeah,
of like where you need to go out and fulfill that desire that it started building in your brain. You did get to a point like when you were about like 16, and I know your parents are separated at that point, where actually like you called upon your dad and you decided to move back up into London to like train for like applying into the army.
yeah,
Um, And do you have a memory or a thought about like what clicked in your head that you did, that wanted you to go and do that?
Well, you know, after that, you're talking that was in Honiton, it was about 5 or 6 years of a lot of trouble. You know, I was in a lot of trouble at school. I was heavily involved with drugs that escalated into heavy drug use of all kinds, and then I was getting in trouble with the police. And I remember I was with a group of people who beat someone up quite badly, and we were all in the police cell in the police station for it. I remember watching these videos back, just I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It scared me. It scared me, the road we were going down, and at that stage, the drug use had gone from smoking cannabis at 10, 11 years of age to now crack cocaine and heroin was coming on the scene. You know, because it started so young, you've gone through everything, and that petrified me.
That was a positive there, wasn't it? That was a positive time in your life. And but it's good to see how you were able, even then, in the midst of like, you know, a lot of negativity, like able to get a thread of like light from somewhere and start working towards it. And you know, and this is where I hold my hat off to you, which have become apparent in your later life story. Like, you know, you have always got that. You've always had that thread of like looking for something, you know, which is what you've expanded on in you know, what fulfills your time now. So you worked really hard and you trained like, you know, like probably morning, noon and night, because you knew you needed to get fit for the army, for the Air Corps.
Yeah.
And you know, you successfully got in, and you know, you absolutely smashed like 3 months of training. I remember we were chatting about down in Winchester.
Yeah.
I mean, to the point where like, you know, you guys won the Warrior Trophy. So, you know, there's all this, you know, you're obviously really good at that, and you're obviously like really driven and ambitious, and have that dedication to like when you want to do something, you're gonna do it and see it through.
Yeah.
And the note I got here is like, but you got bored again. Why was that? Why do you think you got bored there again? Why did the army start boring you?
You know, there was me growing up for me was like always chaotic. There was always chaos. So it's however much you try to escape it, it's sort of what you're drawn to, because it's what you know. You know, it's how you're made up. So this program is, you know, it's strong, especially if it started throughout your whole, you know, your younger teens and stuff like that. And so when the training was 100 mile an hour, I absolutely loved it, because it was, you know, it was such a buzz. It was the training. I found it, the harder it was, you know, I had this, I would be able to just find it funny. Like whenever everyone's really struggling and the training, the tougher it got, the more amused I would be by it, and the more, you know, determined I would be to keep pushing. And I just loved it. But when the training died down, we were sat around, and it was stuff like going to wash the military vehicle, you know, go and clean all the vehicles down, go and clean all the bloody weapons. And it was just really boring, mundane tasks. The excitement wasn't there, you know. Like I was always drawn to, well, I didn't know I was always drawn to that at the time, but you know, going through a child as well with lots of drugs, uppers and downers and all that sort of thing. I think, yeah, I just needed it to be full on. I needed to be screamed and shouted at and be running around and you know, doing what I loved.
I think that's really interesting, actually, isn't it? It's becoming apparent, isn't it? I think I can see it in you as we're chatting, and I'm realizing it, that, you know, like you need to be occupied. like literally,
Yeah.
like, and I love the fact that, like you said, like in a sadistic way, like when others were struggling, you really enjoyed it because you could just like grit your teeth and get on. And again, I think that is definitely a trait of like, I'm going to call it Steve V.2 with like with your current life, like, because the challenges that you take on of an endurance matter, like only a sadistic person would do.
Only someone like borderline crazy.
But obviously, like, you know, this boredom kind of crept in and around the edges of like when you're in the Air Corps, and I know we spoke about the fact that, you know, to try and kill some of that time again, like, you know, like to stop you from just being perpetually bored, you know, you started drinking and gambling. And I know there's a really good story in there about like how that all got to a pinnacle on
Yeah.
on one evening.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, after 2 years in the army, you know, once it started fizzling down stuff, you know, I went down to the town, and I went in the bookmakers with the guy, and I put about £3 on a roulette machine, and it come in at 128 quid off of one spin. That was it. It was such a buzz. I was like hooked on it instantly, and then, you know, I started gambling a lot. Cut a long story short, I ended up in a lot of debt in a short space of time. It caused me a lot of problems, and in the NAFI, on the Army Air Corps barracks at the School of Army Aviation with the Wallop, it was they had £250 jackpot fruit machines in the bar, like 2, 4, they were everywhere, and you know, I started playing on them a lot, drinking bar and stuff, and I lost thousands of pounds over quite a short space of time. I just had enough, and one night I had put about £400 into this, and I still see it though. Noel Edmonds. I can't stand the sight of him because it was a £250 jackpot fruit machine with Noel Edmonds, Deal or No Deal, and it haunts me. His face haunts me, and
It haunts lots of people. I wouldn't worry about it.
So yeah, I'd lost all my money. I'd lost my rag. I waited until they closed the shutters on the bar and everyone left, and I come back and smashed the machine up and took my money back out of it. I almost felt robbed, you know, like I felt robbed. So I just wouldn't settle for it. So I just, you know, out of a moment of anger and frustration, I was so frustrated at that time. So, you know, I just went back in and I took all the money back out of the machine. And
Yeah,
yeah,
because you felt like you owed it. And again, I think this is a classic example of like you weren't controlled by it, but you were kind of like controlled and paralyzed by the gambling machine, weren't you? It had you in its grip, but it was doing exactly what it does. So that was a big night for you. But you got back what you wanted.
well, yeah, well, at the time, yeah, for a moment, but yeah, the gambling, it is without a doubt the most paralyzing thing I've ever like experienced as an addiction.
I think you also had like a shining moment post that night, because obviously there were a lot of very upset people on base, but you managed to see yourself right out of that, didn't you? You had the integrity to like step up to it, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's the next day. The whole military barracks was on lockdown, and nobody was going to be going home until the person come forward. And you know, it's in the military. It's something that's really, you know, driven into you from day one of training is integrity, you know, and honesty, because you need to have that with, because you have the guy next to you, and you have to trust him with your life, and you have to trust him with yours. So if that trust and integrity and honesty is gone, then it could put people's lives in danger. So it's a really, you know, massive thing in the military. And so, you know, there was without a doubt, you know, everyone else was going to get punished for what I had done. So I marched down to the guard room at the time. Corporal Jarvis, one of the provo officers in there. I marched in, said, look, you know, I'm here to admit to the machine being broken into, and the money stolen. It was me. They marched me off to straight away. Actually, you know, they were actually really. I was petrified. You know, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know how they were going to react with me. But they were actually quite had a little bit of sort of respect for like coming forward and owning up. You know, and from there I was marched to the sergeant major's office. questioned about whether I'd done it and how I'd done it and stuff. You know, he said, "You do realize the seriousness of this and the implications and stuff." And yeah, I just had to own up. And within 24 hours of that, I'd gone from turning my life around and being a British soldier to being handed an administration discharge.
Crikey.
And, back to where I fought so hard to escape.
I can imagine that, and I think you're allowed to accept those feelings. You know, like you say, you'd worked incredibly hard, like not to get away from it before, and unfortunately, it got thrown away in an act that was, you know, an irrational thought at the time, but there was actually, you know, you were gripped by this habit that you'd had there. It was kind of skewing like your thoughts around what you should expect from that. And you know, but I also like, you know, some of the points you made in there around the family that you built, and interestingly, like the respect that you even got at discharge, and I think that's a really good point for people to hear about the army and stuff, actually, in the way that camaraderie and integrity even goes through to that last step there. Like, you know, the fear that you built up because of, like, you know, at one of the earlier stages in fear, like your imagination was dictating your thoughts around how they were going to treat you, but actually in reality it was completely different. So that was quite interesting. And I know, like, we spoke a little bit previously about that day you left, and I wrote down two words which really resonated with me. You said, like, these two words which I thought were, like, incredibly telling around about how low you felt, and you kind of touched on it just now, but you mentioned previously you felt emotionally bankrupt.
Oh yeah, completely. There was nothing. It was like just that my whole body and mind were just like a sea of just waves of just, I can't even explain it, but just real deep sadness. Like just it was overpowering, and it was just, I felt numb.
Realization of, like, what had actually occurred
Yeah.
now, and what you had in front of you, because basically, like you said, you'd managed to run away from where you didn't want to be, and now you'd ejected yourself back into that. And I know that day was a pretty bad day with regards to that. I think you said you went down, you ran off and got a bottle of JD and pretty much down the whole thing on a train back out to Honiton.
Yeah.
And got home, and what happened when you got home? That's a bit of an interesting evening, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's just going back to what you're looking for that escape. You're down that bottle of Jack Daniels, and being so in such an emotional mess, and feeling like I really didn't know, I couldn't see any way for me back out of this, apart from going back to the life that I didn't want to be living. And so the only thing that I could think at that time was, well, I don't want to live that life, and I can't see any way I'm ever going to get back from that. I've just been discharged from the army. Nobody's going to touch me. I'm going to be struggle to get a job. So I didn't want to live, and I downed that bottle of alcohol out of desperation and pure numbness and sadness. I locked myself in the bathroom and just started cutting my wrist. I just slashed it out my wrist, and my brother kicked the door in. My brother was there at the time. He kicked the door in, then rang an ambulance, and they patched me up and whatnot. And then they were going to arrest me. The police were going to arrest me for my own safety, because I was in such an emotional state. And everyone in the household at the time just pleaded to leave me there, said that I was safer there. And as soon as the ambulance went, I ran out the door, and I was just running down the high street in an emotional mess, punching, kicking, everything that I could. It was like I can't even picture it now. You know, I can see it, I can remember it well, but I was just lost completely, an absolute mess, punching and kicking everything. Eventually, 20 minutes later, I was arrested. I'd punched windows through, I'd kicked bins in, I was punching the glass out of phone boxes, and I think I just needed some help. I was screaming out, please, like, help me. What am I going? I just didn't know what I was going to do, where I'm going to go. It was painful. It was tough. But I got arrested that night and then spent the night in the cell.
That was probably the best place for you at that point.
Without doubt.
Yeah.
And they were quite good to me, you know, because one of the guys was ex-military, you know, the police officer, and they actually sat on the chair with the door open in the police station and chatted to me all night. And that although there was nothing that was going to be able to change the way that I was feeling, it really did make a difference at that time. So yeah, I can't remember the guy's name, but absolute legend, you know, for doing that, because
like compassion is an incredibly strong force, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like if only the world and if more people could understand that, it would have such a massive positive effect everywhere. But I think, you know, like, you know, on that day of discharge, and, you know, right through to the point where you ended up in the cell all night chatting to the chat that was very kindly spoke you through that evening into the early morning, you were literally paralyzed by the fear of the unknown, weren't you? And it's weird, like, yeah, it's weird. I think that when we're talking about this as well, like, you know, like lots of people in these stages of fear, I think in general life and instances are shocked into things happen to them at a rate of speed where they're shocked and they get paralyzed for a very short period of time. I think there's like, when I reflect on some of the things we're discussing tonight, there are patterns where actually you're paralyzed over long periods of time.
Yeah, massively. And that's why it's taken so, you know, because it's not just like everything's been hunky-dory up until that point and I've made a mistake and things have gone wrong. It's just it's a decade of trauma, like, you know, bad stuff going on and going wrong. So yeah, it was tough at that point, you know, 19 years of age, couldn't see any way out of it, couldn't see where I was going to go.
19, and that's quite interesting for me, like as a you know, we think about like everything we've spoken about, that was all up to the age of like 19. You're still like a whippersnapper at 19, isn't it? I mean, you've not done anything at 19, but actually you've done a lot. Squeezed a lot of life in your pre-20s, mate. There's definitely a lot going on there, and like the period that followed that night in the cell, I know you kind of spent about 6 months. I think you discussed we lived on the streets. And what did you do?
Well, you know, I was so like withdrawn and emotionally sort of bankrupt, as I said before. There was people that cared about me, and there probably was people that would put me up at you know, given times, but I didn't want to be around anyone. I didn't have anything to say to anybody. I didn't feel anything. I was extremely, you know, you say that word paralyzed, like I was completely and utterly, I just wanted to die. That's the honest truth. At that time, I did not want to live, but I didn't have like in me to actually do it in any other way. So the only way that I knew was just drink, and I was just breaking into pubs and shops and stealing as much alcohol as I could get my hands on, usually spirits, and just sit there drinking bottles and bottles of spirits, you know, and or wine or whatever the strongest thing that I could get my hand on, and just keep drinking. And you know, that at one point, you know, I started smoking heroin and crack cocaine, and I'd just given up. I tried hard to turn it around, and I always wanted to. I guess if you always want to like I was always ambitious. I always wanted to be something. I always wanted to be someone. I always wanted to do something great. I wanted my life to mean something, and it was tough. It's tough because it wasn't going the way that I wanted it to go, and I couldn't see any way back. So yeah, I just drunk myself into the ground. Within a couple of months, it was over the space of 6 months, up and down, all over. It was, you know, I was rolled up in a bit of carpet, eating out of bakery bins, getting blankets and old clothes out of like the stuff that they'd chucked in the charity bin that they didn't want out the back of the charity. I would literally, it was rough. It was a rough few months. But within 6 months, I'd been arrested for all the pubs and shops that I'd broken into to steal alcohol, and was handed a 4-month prison sentence within 6 months of my discharge. So 6 months ago, I'm serving Her Majesty. 6 months later, I'm locked up in Her Majesty's prison.
But
yeah.
you know, you had that break up in town, which was an interesting experience. And then I know you came back down south with a kind of reinvigorated soul, where you know you kind of like you'd seen like some entrepreneurial guys that were setting up like the car washes that we see up and down the country now, and you worked really hard to like get yourself a license, and you spent a couple of years doing that. But beyond that and after that, I know you started working like in construction. You're starting to really get yourself like back on your feet again, and you kind of like brought some real routine and rigor. But then you spotted an ad, and I think that ad was about suffering children and an opportunity to go out to Uganda. So what was that about?
So I at the time I was I guess I had gone through quite a lot, you know, in my life, and I sort of I'd got myself on my feet a little bit, you know. I was doing all right, and I'd managed to come through so much, and I just wanted to try and help. That I just couldn't help but think back a little bit, even though I wasn't fully where I want to be, and I'm still not. You know, we're constantly working towards it. But at that time, I'd got past some of the most challenging parts of my life, and I just remember thinking that, God, there's many parts of that past where I could have not made it, you know, easily. And I just felt like I wanted to try and help other people that might have suffered. You know, my childhood has had a real long lasting impact on me. And I just, yeah, I see that ad, and I see the children, and I just something inside of me intuitively thought, you know what, like it might be a way for me to find more healing, to help others that are less fortunate and try to help them through. So I went out, and I just teed it up and went out to Africa for 3 months. But I met a guy who really wanted to go and do that as well, Jacob Blackwell, and I was working with him down in Plymouth. And we become really good, close friends because we had very similar outlooks on life. And we went out there together and did 3 months volunteering. And actually, I'm really glad that I met him and we went to do it together, because I'm not sure if I would have gone on my own, although I wanted to, and he wanted to. So it was great that we found each other and both wanted to go and do this. So we went out, and we volunteered with this project that saves children off the street. Something that really resonated with me in a way that, you know, just these children on the street. And I just remember back to sort of my childhood, like being scared and feeling alone and feeling like no one was there for me, you know, feeling like, and I just, it just made me really think about these kids on the street with no one to turn to, no help, no guidance, you know. I just really put a lot of energy into sort of working with these kids. And after the 3 months volunteering out there, I come away thinking I haven't really found, my purpose in life yet, but maybe this is it. Maybe I can turn my own suffering into something positive, something big enough that one keeps me you know, is big enough to keep me grounded and focused, and two, big enough to and two, just something that I feel passionate and love for, you know. So yeah, we come away and got back to England, started building the charity.
It's incredible, mate. Like, you know, like, having known you, you know, for a few years now, seen you on the journey that you've been on, and known some of your background. You know, embarking on a journey like that is phenomenal. It's you know, no one can take that away from you. And again, I think, you know, it requires an extreme amount of hard work and dedication and persistence. You know, two of my favorite words in life are persistence and resilience. You know, and people around me hear me use those words a lot, because actually, you know, I think they're like sewn right through the middle of me, because I couldn't do what I do. It's very different, but it requires that same approach. And, you know, like, you're kind of drawn to the fact that it is a challenge and it is a big thing to do. Like, lots of people say they're going to do that, but you've done it. You've put the hard work in. You've got the charity registered, and like, challenge child poverty is growing. And like you say, there are ups and downs with it. I mean, it's like it's like a business, you know. It needs running like that, and you're going to end up meeting great people on that journey. And like, incredibly, this is where I want to talk about like some of your recent feats, which I think, you know, lots of these listeners are going to be slightly surprised about now, like the levels of endurance that you can put yourself through. So like, earlier this year, I know you took on the feat to raise money by just running across Africa. I can only say it in a light-hearted way, because I can't say it with seriousness. It's got to be like,
Yeah.
Did you just like wake up one morning and go, yeah, I think I'm going to run across Africa?
Yeah, it's not your everyday challenge, and I mean, actually, only 2 people have ever run across the width of Africa, as far as I know. I would have been the third, but yeah, you know, when I set the charity up and we come back, and then we looked at how we could promote our first running event. I wanted to build mass endurance sporting events, specifically 24-hour endurance events, so we could do like weekend festivals of running, and build these real inspiring and motivational, you know, weekends of running, and raise a lot of money and awareness for the charity. So once I started putting that idea for our first event, which was meant to be staged this year, but obviously it's postponed until 5th and 6th of June next year, Conquer 24 at Falcon Castle. But I thought, right, what big challenge can I do that's going to raise a lot of money for one of the projects that I volunteered with out in Uganda, Amari, Uganda. I wanted to help them build a long-term home for the children, because the one they were renting was up for sale, and I also wanted to try and help them get enough land so that they could become self-sufficient and grow their own food, and try to help as many children as they can off the streets and get them an education. And that was the plan behind it, but also to, off the back of that, get the PR for the running event, and, you know, it'll all tie in nicely together. Yeah, I thought, why don't I go and run across Africa? You know, why not? Why not? And to be honest, I never. It's really strange, because I'm usually driven by fear, and for one, I didn't ever sit down and think about all the things the danger that could lurk. I was just so determined to get it done and do it, and so determined to help the charity grow, and so determined to help Amari Uganda get their long-term home, and just so determined to make this happen, that never even really was that fearful of the idea of it in the beginning. I was more fearful of just like not being able to complete it, if you like, rather than any danger that might lurk along the way. But yeah, so put the plan together. I think within 6 months of me deciding we were going to do it, we were out landing in Tanzania, getting ready to go and run 2,500 miles across the width of Africa.
And just for context, like, you know, because just for everyone who's listening, who's like, well, yeah, like, what's the time? You were like, how many marathons basically did you run back to back?
So I ran 68 marathons in 66 days, but you must understand that 9 days were hold-ups at border crossings and cars breaking down and stuff. So I say 68 marathons in 66 days, but I was running on average 30 to 35 miles a day. So it was like one day I ran 54 miles, and the next day I ran 40, and 37 and a half after that. I had some big mileage built up in the days, and that was ran in 30, high 30s degrees temperatures, and constant high humidity. It was really, really tough. And I suffer with vitiligo. I've got everything's against me to go to a hot country and run across a hot country. I had to wear gloves, long sleeve t-shirts, long sleeve hat, and I still had to plaster myself in sun cream, and I was still getting sunburned. It was everything was against me, but it was the perfect challenge, I thought, at the time.
Didn't stop you, did it? Like I remember following you avidly through the little world of little squares on Insta.
Yeah.
And the stories you were posting were absolutely incredible. So I've got to ask it. So what was the scariest thing about being out there? Like what did get you in that fearful bit? Did you have anything truly that was quite worrying?
Yeah, I mean, once I say I wasn't fearful of it when I was before getting out there, but once I landed on the ground, I was extremely I was focused and I was determined. I was harnessing that fear, and it was driving me forward. But God, I was scared a lot. I was frightened a lot of times. But running through national parks, for instance, in the back of your head, it's always, there are lions, there are elephants. Elephants are more dangerous than anything. They're just wandering around everywhere. If one of them charges you, you're finished. So yeah, that is in your mind, but it's also just like wonder. It's beautiful. It's like I was willing to take the risk of whatever the worst thing could happen for the cause. I thought it was worth it.
You got like about like over 2/3 of the way across, and then obviously like the global pandemic that is COVID.
Why? I mean, I know, to be honest, everybody's been hit hard by it, and I feel sorry for all the people that have been hit a lot harder than us. People have lost their lives, so you have to keep it in context.
Well, I'm just going to say, on behalf of all of us listening now, like, congratulations on what you did achieve. Is epic, mate. Like, let's not take that away from the scale of what it is that you keep putting yourself out there for. I'd just like you to tell the listeners again about like the new up and coming challenge that Mr. Steve Crompton is putting himself out for. So what's planned for like 2022?
2022, yes. So Brendan Rendell, who's one of the two people that have ran across the width of Africa, is planning to run the length of Africa. And when I come back, I was determined to go back to where I started and finish my run on the width of Africa. But as time went on, I thought I may as well just, I'm coming up 31, like I may as well just up it a level and take it up a level. And so I messaged Brendan and said, so you're running the length of Africa? And he's like, yeah, I'm going to run it as well. And over time, it sort of, spoke about racing each other, turning it into a race, the 6,500 mile race down the length of Africa, to try and beat the world record of 318 days. And we both, Brendan Rendell's done a lot of adventure, ultra running, and raised a tremendous amount of money for charity, for projects in Malawi. He's raised a lot of money for projects here at home at the zoo in Manchester. And together it could be a really massive thing to race down the length of Africa. It'd be a huge challenge, one of a lifetime challenge, but also big enough to, help us to raise a massive amount of awareness for the causes that are close to our hearts. And we're gonna race each other down the length of Africa. at 6,500 miles from Cairo to Cape Town. Hopefully try and beat the world record. Hopefully one of us will get it. It'd be tough, it'd be really tough. But, you know, I think you've only got, you could say just, you know, just go and do a small little challenge, like run across, I don't know, you know, the UK, or go and run across America would probably be, you know, a lot shorter than the land of Africa, and a lot less dangerous. But yeah, you've only got one life. You may as well just, you know, go out and go for the biggest thing you can possibly see yourself doing. And running the length of Africa is probably the biggest thing that I could think of. You know, there's only a handful of people that's ever done it, and no one's beat the world record since 1998, set by Nicholas Bourne. So yeah, it's quite exciting, but it's not possible unless we can secure sponsorship. We're trying to get a documentary commissioned, but without sponsorship in place, it's going to be difficult, because it's quite it's a hell of a cost. You know, I funded the run across the width of Africa myself to help the charity and everything, and that was a big cost. You know, your support team, support vehicle, and all of that. So if we can try and get a documentary made up with it as well, you know, I think that'd be good. But yeah, we're going to be putting out an advert soon, and we're going to start getting proposals out there to sponsors, and see if we can get ourselves a sponsor, and yeah, go and race down the length of Africa and raise a lot of money to help unfortunate children to get access to a childhood and a future. So yeah.
It's amazing, mate. It honestly is absolutely incredible. I don't think you're going to get any difficulty in getting somebody behind you to do that. It's not something that happens all the time. It's a feat beyond feats. You know, it's not like running like the width of like Wales or like the UK. It's Africa. There's a lot of power behind that word, and a word behind that word, and a lot of miles, like over 6,000. So like, if you know, it's incredible, mate. I take my hat off to you. You've like completely, like, you know, you have completely turned your life around. Like if you think about like the beginnings of like just the chat we had earlier, where we started off, and what you've been through, and the torture and the torment and the paralysis that you've been facing like continually over the 30 plus years in different guises. Actually, you've managed to use that and harness it, and I think, you know, you've definitely coming out fighting now. You know, less flight, more fight with power, to do great and really really amazing things. So you know, there's a lot of people that probably want to say thanks to you for like all the good that you do for them, and you know, like, may you long continue to do that, and get the support that you need, mate. It's incredible. So thanks for that. It's been a pleasure chatting with you today, mate. It's absolutely incredible. I think it's going to be really enlightening for a lot of people and you know, and for some maybe like to give them hope around like when, you know, everything doesn't look good, or you get like a long run of like when everything feels bad, that actually if you focus enough, then you can still make that work, with a lot of determination and persistence and resilience, and break through those phases, particularly paralysis, if that's something you're suffering from at the time. So I just want to like kind of round up with some learnings, and I think it's good to remind ourselves that like paralysis is made up of two parts. It's like it's the mind and the body, isn't it? It's like those two bits together.
Yeah.
And actually tonight you've demonstrated in like some of the amazing recollection of, you know, I call it storytelling, but they're real life events, of how you've equipped your mind to make your body move forward and do different things, you know, whether it be a grueling event of like running across Africa, or actually pushing yourself into some really uncomfortable spaces that then gave you the break to like try and have some respite from the, you know, the torrid life that you were experiencing. I think also like some interesting points tonight that we've covered off around actually how you can use your own moral compass to push through paralysis. You know, I think, you know, that you've definitely done that over the years.
Definitely. yeah. I mean, it's yeah. You can really push through it, just by using your own experience.
That's great. That's a wonderful summary there, Mel. I like that, and I think part of that is about and I know everyone says it right now, but actually I think when if people are out there and find themselves that they're stuck by something, if they're paralyzed by fear or life or locked into something they need to get out of, actually if we segment it and take it apart and deconstruct it and just be within the moment right now, and not let the brain be that torturous thing that it can be, where it torments us about the past and inflects visions of the future which aren't true, then actually that gives you also the equipment to move out from there. And I mean you've obviously got a huge amount of gratitude and integrity, Steve. Fair play to you. Even when you've been on your knees and recognize that you've not been the best version of yourself, you've even managed to you've managed to see past that, and have the light to hold it up to yourself and not let that tarnish others. That's really good. You need to. I know you recognize it, but you should recognize it.
Yeah.
And weirdly, I think one of the things we spoke about at the start of the chat was that actually paralysis. We talked about it and we opened about this being this horrible thing where it grips you and it holds you, and is it fight or flight you need to do? But actually, in some instances we spoke about tonight, it's been the thing that saved you.
Yeah. No, it has. It has in a lot of moments in my life.
I just want to say thanks, mate. I really appreciate the time tonight. I've really enjoyed it. I'm sure everyone that's listening has enjoyed it. It's been such a colourful chat with regards to the things that you've been open and honest about, and lots of people wouldn't be able to talk about that or wouldn't want to have to talk about that stuff in the open. So I'm super appreciative of that. Thank you. And I also just want to say, because I think you need to hear it, you've achieved greatness, mate. And you are continuing to push the boundaries beyond what a lot of people would deem acceptable to give to others, what you are taking away from yourself from pain of the experience of this, that you're pushing through. So and that's beyond what lots of people would do. So give yourself a big pat on the back, mate. And it's good. You've
Yeah. No, I appreciate it, mate. Really do. But for me, it's I need to make that count. I need to make that count and to make sure that I can make that and help others not have to go through as much of that. I think it's important. I think if we all did that, the world would be a much better place in a lot less amount of time.
It would be. You're absolutely right. So do you want to say goodbye, mate?
Yeah. Hey, thank you very much for having me on and listening to me waffling on for the past how long is it, an hour or so?
Yeah.
If anyone wants to have a chat about anything that we've been speaking about tonight, you can get on me on Instagram or Facebook or our charity Instagram, Challenge Child Poverty, the website challengechildpoverty.org.uk. And if you want to challenge yourself, get over on to our website and sign up to Conquer 24 in stage next year. It's a 24-hour running event.
I think I'm gonna have to get myself on there, aren't I? I'm not gonna escape that one, am I? I'm gonna. I think that definitely that your my name will be popping up there soon. It. Yeah. Thanks ever so much, mate. It's been brilliant.
Hey,
I just want to. No, it's a pleasure, mate. Honestly, the pleasure's all mine. It's been fantastic. I'm just gonna let everyone know about the next podcast that we've got, where actually we talk about the stage of acceleration which follows paralysis, and actually we'll be chatting with Ollie Ollerton, somebody you're familiar with.
Wonderful man, yeah, very inspirational.
Yeah, he absolutely is that. But from memory, I think he also caused you a lot of pain on Who Dares Wins.
yeah, but pain that was needed.
So the serial entrepreneur that he is going to chat to me about acceleration in the next podcast, and I'm looking forward to that. And thanks for listening, everybody. I'm Al, and this is Over and Out.